Well, it looks as though we're about to play Snap or something, but actually on the back of the cards are questions which the women have sent in. So I'm going to turn over the first. Why do we still have systems that favour men?
Because the system was created by men.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the problems about law generally is that women just weren't there in the making of this, of the whole sort of, if you like, the rules that underpin our legal systems anywhere in the world, actually. And of course, there have been women who've learned to play the game the male way. But getting those systems to really take account of the reality of women's lives has been hard, and it's still proving hard. And I think that's one of the great failures of the system. And we have to renegotiate this world, and we actually have to sort of start engineering it in a different way. And that's the big challenge.
In my little world of the theatre, we have to be proactive. Maybe it's the same in your world. We have to start to design the world we want and write the plays about reflecting the world we want rather than doggedly imitating the world as it is. And that takes imagination, and it takes a lot of courage against a lot of preemptive criticism.
Any kind of reform, though, it involves imagination. It's just that it's not valued as a component in law's change. I've seen such great projects involving women, and the investment in them is actually less than you would spend on keeping somebody in prison.
I keep hearing this, and also the whole idea of helping women to kick a drug dependency, or helping them to kick a bad cycle in a relationship that they feel they can't get out of. Since I've been a patron of Clean Break, pretty near the beginning of its life, I've seen the growth of women's confidence as performers, the fact that somebody is wanting to tell their story. Sounds like something small, but it's ginormous. Yeah. If you've ended up in trouble, you've probably had very low self-esteem, you've probably had very little control over your life or proactive possibilities in your life. And we all know that affects men as well, but with women there's a sense that their voices have been not heard and their faces have not been seen. And so I think what I've seen Clean Break give to women is a voice and face and a story that they're putting out there, and the knowledge that their story is being put out there, and the fact that a theatre company exists because it wants to tell their stories has an enormous effect of encouraging people, I think.
What has got worse in the past 40 years for women? Because of course it's 40 years since Clean Break was created. And what's got worse? I think one of the things that has got worse is that sentences have been ratcheted up. We've seen it as sort of, in the name of equality, we've started seeing women being actually dealt with as if they were men, and not taking account of the fact that actually their lives have been different, the disadvantages that brought them before the courts, and the fact that treating as equal those who are not equal.
It's the wrong kind of equality, isn't it? Because they don't start with a level playing field.
I mean, it actually creates greater inequality. Yeah. And the truth is that you have to contextualise. Real justice comes from looking at the context in which that life has been lived, of the persons coming before you, of the people who have suffered the consequences of their actions. You have to really look beyond the courtroom door. And sometimes the courts and our justice system thinks that by treating people mechanically in an equal way that you get equality, and of course it doesn't. No. It's not about that. And so we've seen women being sent to prison, I think, for longer terms. And I think the lack of imagination, you were talking about the importance of imagination in the theatre and so on, the lack of imagination in not looking for real alternatives to prison. Here's a question which a woman has asked, which says, why do women in prison matter? And they matter because, I mean, basically it's a measure of the kind of society you have if those who are out of sight are not to be considered in the scheme of things, to render invisible people by putting them in a place where they're to be discarded, is about saying, this doesn't matter. And so why do women in prison matter? Because they are actually a challenge to us about the kind of world that we live in, the kind of society we live in. And I feel that the fact that we are imprisoning large numbers of women who have never committed a crime of violence, who've often been committing crimes because they've got a dependency problem, because they themselves have been abused, because they have been harmed and hurt in their lives, because society has not served them well. Prisons matter because they remind us of our own failure. And so I really feel once you start, abandoning the issue of prison, we're in serious trouble. And that's why we have to keep it on the agenda.
I just happened to turn over while you were saying that. What does theatre give to women? Mm-hmm. And sort of tied up with that, why do women in prison matter? The thing is that what theatre gives, theatre is the opposite of prison. Theatre gives you individual identity, it finds your voice, it tells your particular story with all its nuances. I know from playing parts that it gives you authority, it gives you power just to be the person who's telling the story.
For me, the thing that I love about the theatre, and I love about Clean Break, it doesn't matter what the size of the space is, there's still an intimacy, the liveness of it. Mm-hmm. It's the very liveness of it that I love.
Is the casting couch a reality?
Well, it's a bit of a Me Too, that whole abuse of power thing that happens in your world, or at least we all are given to understand it happens in film and television and theatre and stuff.
I was very impressed by the fact that the agricultural workers in America wrote an open letter of solidarity with the Hollywood stars, because there could so easily have been such a big class gap between those people and those workers. Well, what's your problem? You earn millions of dollars, why do we care? I thought that was so enlightened and open-minded of those women to understand that it was the same problem.
In any workplace where there's power disparity, you know that women will often be expected to put up with sexual impositions that come as part of that.
I think it's complicated in the question about the casting couch. There's an added sort of complication about it, in that employment in the theatre world and film world is so random in a funny way. It's not about can you do this job. But I just think that we are now in a situation, first of all, thanks to the women who started the whole outcry over Harvey Weinstein, which has had a ripple effect. It's gone through to UK certainly, and that we now have the possibility of recognising that we don't have to be victims, that there is a body of people who will help us. The production companies I've worked for now address the company on the first day and say, look, if anybody finds they're being bullied or in any way feels uncomfortable with some physical encroachment, we are here to hear your stories, etc. Now that is an enormous cultural difference from 3 or 4 years ago.
Women have now found a tool which they can use, which anonymously empowers them to be able to call out bad behaviour. And for me, that is civil disobedience. It was basically the same as the suffragettes putting a brick through a window. This was a brick through the windows of the criminal justice systems the world over. And it was saying your laws, your systems for complaint, your systems for dealing with grievance do not work. And they don't work for us. And they don't work inside the workplace because we're not listened to and we're not believed. Mm-hmm. And I've been working in the law too long, and I feel that still women are not well served by the system. It's got better over the past 40 years for women. I mean, for women in prison. I mean, one of the things is that the agenda is there now. I mean, when I started, and it was 40 years ago, over 40, started practicing at the bar, domestic violence was not treated seriously as if it was a proper crime. You know, it was basically, you know, she had it coming to her, or she was, you know, she's a nag and she gives as good as she gets, or whatever, and it was not dealt with as crime. And yet the cost to society of domestic violence is huge in mental ill health and what happens to the next generation and what it does to children and so on. So domestic violence, the business of sexual violence, the business of sexual harassment, the business of lack of equal pay, the way in which women are from a very early age often made not to feel good about themselves, and women who are made to feel that somehow if bad things happen to them, it's their fault.
Yes.
And so I do think we're getting to a better place.
I've got the same question. What has got better over the past 40 years for women in theatre? Well, quite a lot has got better for women in theatre, in the sense that we've got many more women directors and writers right now. I wouldn't even say the last 40 years, I'd say the last 15 years have been a huge jump forward for women in theatre. Women are running theatre buildings, women are directing shows, women are writing shows, women are playing males' roles. There's a whole gender crossover on stage, but that isn't the answer, because we don't want to play men. We want people to write stories about women, and people, not get so tied up with gender differentiation anyway, be more fluid about that.
Are we ever going to see change in the criminal justice system and its unfair treatment of women? Well, one of the things that we have to do I think, is that we have to actually be quite radical. We have to say there's far too many people in prison who shouldn't be there at all. And I would actually like us to say, right, let's go through it. How many of these women are actually there for non-violent offences? I actually think we should be clearing out of the system huge numbers of women.
We'd save a lot of money.
And we'd save a ton of money, and we actually should be putting it into therapeutic help, putting it into proper housing, putting it into proper opportunities for training and for literacy and for all the different things that we know are part of the problems that in women's lives that are in there. And you end up locking far too many people up, and you end up creating a warehouse for people, for human beings, which to me is contrary to human rights and respect and dignity, and it also basically is not actually good for society. Here's our last one. What can we all do to make a difference? What can we all do? But I actually do think that the business of prisons being invisible is part of the problem. And I think that what we can all do to make a difference is say, what's going on in there? How many women? Who are these women who are in there? Who are the people that we're locking up? We have to make a better society. All is knitted together for me. The business about the way in which we don't have proper housing. We have really become quite a divided and at times quite self-interested and not very community-minded place. I would like us to actually start building different kinds of societies in which we actually are much more caring about the problems that people have in their lives.
I would think also listen, talk to people and listen, because I think that the theatre, Shakespeare said, holds a mirror up to society. The newspapers and the media holds a very negative mirror up to us.
I just think that the business of wanting to punish has to be examined more closely, and for us to say, is it the answer in so many of the cases? And I don't believe it is. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have to look at the basis for the behaviour and the hurt that has often produced it, and see whether we can do something better.